Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. We're continuing our discussion today about how to make Baltimore a safer city and what some effective enforcement strategies look like. Joining us again is Professor Daniel Webster. He's a professor of health policy at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where he's the director of the Center for Gun Policy Research. He's also the deputy director at the Center for the Prevention of Youth Violence. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
So we left off our last conversation by kind of giving people a preview a little bit about what Safe Streets is. And it's a model where you have ex-offenders that go into the community and they work as violence interrupters, and they stop violent crime and murders from happening on the streets. So talk more about what that program is and why it's proven to be effective in Baltimore.
Sure. So one thing I just want to begin with, and when people think about violent crime in a place like Baltimore, I think people often will think about people being robbed or things going on in a drug transaction. However, it's remarkable how many young people are shot over various altercations, signs of disrespect, different conflict that they get into. And they don't really always have the skills or in essence, the sort of the social rewards for addressing those conflicts in ways that don't involve violence. And so what this program, Safe Streets, tries to do is create a new norm, create a new code of the street, so to speak, that real men work out their differences rather than shoot each other when they have a problem. The individuals who are hired to work in this program, first of all, these are only operating in some of the most violent parts of our city where the problem is concentrated. They will typically hire individuals that have some history on the streets in those very communities, but have turned their lives around. And they've been vetted both by law enforcement as well as the Department of Public Health that oversees the program in Baltimore. And then they've received training in two basic kinds of things. You mentioned the violence interruption part, which is really important. That's my research has really indicated is incredibly important. So when these altercations occur, often, not always, but often there's something, sort of word on the street, so-and-so's beefing with somebody else and something might go down. And there's some time in which individuals can then come in and try to work out a resolution. And sort of not only in the immediate sense, but hopefully in the longer term to have situations where there's less violence. We should remember that the individuals who are involved in gun violence, they don't like it. They don't want to shoot somebody because most of them are smart enough to realize if they shoot someone, there's probably two outcomes for them, none of which is good, which is, one is they'll go to jail. Obviously, they don't want that. The other is, now they've shot someone, so guess what? The bullseye's on them. Whoever they shot, they have family, they have friends, they're part of a group, and now they're vulnerable. So really, many of them are actually looking for an alternative, but it's hard to break out of that so-called code of the street. So these Safe Streets workers kind of they're the mediators. They work out these resolutions so people can sort of maintain their status, their masculinity, without making that bad choice that leaves them with, again, either looking forward to many years behind bars or being a target for future gun violence. So a big part of what they do is mediate these conflicts. The other thing that they're doing, which is very important because they're not going to be effective mediators until they're trusted. And they build trust through their outreach. They're out on the street on a daily basis, connecting with the individuals that they think are at highest risk. They're building relationships to try to steer them in more productive, safer kind of lifestyles. So those are the two kinds of things that they are doing. And I guess the third thing that's sort of related to both of them is they're providing a positive role model for, in particular, for youth. So the program model comes from Chicago. Interestingly, it was an infectious disease control specialist who worked on HIV and tuberculosis all over the world, and found that gun violence, again, sort of has this contagious aspect of it, just like an infectious disease. And if you can prevent one shooting to lead to a next, you could be preventing a whole bunch of shootings that follow. And we have studied this program model in Baltimore. We looked at it in 4 communities in Baltimore, some of the most violent communities when it was being implemented. And in 3 of the 4, there were significant reductions in either homicides or non-fatal shootings or both.
And what are those neighborhoods?
Those neighborhoods are McElderry Park in East Baltimore. There were a cluster in East Baltimore that we looked at that time. McElderry Park, Elwood Park, which is just to the east of McElderry Park. Both of those showed reductions in violence. Just north of there is a neighborhood called Madison East End. We did not see positive impacts there. There was actually a short-term increase in violence that it has nothing to do with the program, just sort of what was going on with some gang dynamics at that time.
And what time frame are we talking about here?
Most of those 3 sites were implemented between the summer of 2007 and January of 2009. Cherry Hill in South Baltimore also implemented this program as well, and we saw probably we did see the biggest impact in reducing violence in Cherry Hill, over a 50% reduction in homicides and reduced non-fatal shootings by more than a third in Cherry Hill. We have an ongoing study now. We don't have final data to report, but we're studying new initiatives with Safe Streets in West Baltimore and Mondawmin area, in the Lower Park Heights area in Northwest Baltimore.
And so what are some of the challenges that come along with this type of program, I mean, even though it's proven to be effective?
Yeah, so our experience in Baltimore is somewhat similar to other cities in that not every single place where it's implemented has it been successful, but generally, more often than not, there's less violence. What I found in Baltimore is even though you can have the same program model, the same amount of resources, the same training, you don't get the same impact. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One is not every individual is equally adept at doing this kind of work. Whenever you sort of step back and I like try to explain what these folks do, it's really kind of amazing. If someone said, Giselle, we have a job for you. We're going to have you go into some of the most violent neighborhoods in one of the most violent cities in America. We're going to have you identify the most risky individuals and do your best to keep them from shooting each other. No, we're not going to give you a gun. We're not going to give you any protective armor or anything. You have to rely upon your ability to gain trust and your integrity. That's a tall order that we're asking these individuals, and many of these individuals come from great challenges. That's why they are ex-offenders. They grew up with a host of challenges in their family and their communities. So this is a very tall task that we're asking these individuals to do. We're paying them, but not a lot, and we're not giving them a lot of support in a variety of ways. So again, I think that in order to be effective in the long term, we have to think about this as an investment in the long term, that these should be viewed as part of our team of public safety workers that we need to invest in. We're going to recognize they're in stressful occupations and need help. And sometimes they will make bad choices, and that has happened in this program. So some of the individuals working in the Safe Streets program have broken the law and been caught doing so, and have paid the consequences and are no longer with the program. So that is clearly a risk for this, but basically there are two ways to address this problem. Again, you have to think of that you're trying to change behavior of a very high-risk group of individuals. Law enforcement has their levers, so to speak, of what they can do. But to be effective with this high-risk group, you are going to have to employ individuals with those kind of backgrounds.
That know the streets,
that know the
code,
streets, that know the code, they know what's down, they have respect from individuals, and they're really critical if you're going to change this behavior. So I think it can be an effective model, but it is definitely not without its challenges. But why should we think that's a problem as complex and deep as violence and gun violence should be an easy thing to do? It's not. So we need to invest in it.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's proven to be effective, and
right.
And
there are other cities that in Chicago, for example, where it's been there the longest, with much longer data, to examine longer-term effects. Mostly very positive effects, lowering violence, but not every single community. So I think a common theme where they're talking about safe streets or ceasefire is really attention to detail and implementation, proper management of those programs and investing in them.
And of course, community buy-in is going to be a critical component as well.
Absolutely. So in the places where Safe Streets has really thrived and really made change, the community has embraced them. They're really local heroes, and we need more of those. Now, there have been, in the Madison East End example, where it didn't go so well, I don't think the community, frankly, was as ready. There has a much more deep problems in that community that even with investment in outreach and violence interruption there, they did not get the hoped for response. So.
And it's the same community where the Rose Street Community Center is also based. Are you familiar with?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, and they're doing great work there.
Mm-hmm.
At the time when Safe Streets went in there was probably when things were boiling at the highest temperature that it could have been. So, there are a number of organizations that are trying to influence in positive ways those at highest risk. Safe Streets is one. The Rose Street community is a great example of an effective program as well. But I think the city, almost the entire Safe Streets program has been grant funded, and which you can look at it sort of across the board, and many things that are done in public safety, they only do it if there's some special grant to do it. And my hope is that, I hope they keep getting grants. I will try to help them get grants. Our Center for Prevention of Youth Violence at Hopkins actually funds one of the sites. So there are only 2 neighborhoods that have what we refer to as the full program model in Baltimore, and Hopkins is funding one of them through a grant that it received from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the city hasn't anteed up much to really make this a program that can impact violence in a broader, more sustained way. And I hope that the city, foundations, and others can come together and basically agree that the city's not going to go very far with this rate of gun violence, and we need to use evidence-based programs, but not in a half-hearted way. We have to actually embrace them and invest in them so that they work for the long term.
So I'm not sure if you can comment on this, because will be a political question, but
Mm-hmm.
the city spends, I think, over $300 million for the enforcement for the police department. And a fraction, and so Safe Streets would only represent a fraction of funding compared to the overall police department. Do you think the political equation needs to change as far as what gets funded and what doesn't?
So here's my view. I don't necessarily think I want to pit those two against each other. I think that that's actually part of our problem, is there's a real divide between police and community. And I think really I would look for other places. I think the city needs an effective law enforcement, effective police department. And the officers, for what they do, frankly, are underpaid, I would argue. But the problem is even more so on the prevention side with a program like Safe Streets and some others. So rather than sort of pit, police against Safe Streets, I think you need to look more broadly at your budget and how you fund things, because my view, and this is based on data, is that cities do not grow and thrive economically. They're not going to have a good tax base because people won't move and invest here. They won't want to live here. They won't want to put their business here if Baltimore is seen as too violent of a place. If we invest in making our city safer, we will reap great benefits so that the budgets are going to look a lot better because we have more economic activity in the city. Property values go up. What's the worst thing to reduce property values in a neighborhood? Someone gets shot. If someone gets shot in your neighborhood, particularly if it happens more than once, you can be pretty sure that the value of your home investment just went down, right? And the reverse is true. If you can bring that violence down substantially, you're going to see more people wanting to invest, stay in the city, not flee, and you're going to have a much healthier tax base in which to support an array of city services, both police and prevention.
And that's one of the reasons why so much of the city's population has left over the last several decades.
That's what I would argue. I would think that a very substantial part of the individuals who have left the city have probably done it over two things. One is safety, sense of safety, and schools. And I think, again, you are going to have more revenue to support all of these things when you can create greater safety. So that's my own view, is that we've underinvested in prevention. As far as the law enforcement side, we need police, but we need them to do the things that are effective, not mass arrest of anybody who might have a little weed in their pocket or something like that, or if you've got an expired driver's license, we're going to, if you're on parole or something, give you some big consequence for that. No, the enforcement forces should be focusing on how do we have less gun violence? And if we do that, we'll have a safer city.
Well, Daniel Webster, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, the Real News Network.